Has your business suffered financial hardship due to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic? Your business may be eligible for financial assistance. Hillsborough County is here to help local small businesses through these difficult times. The R3 Kickstart Small Business Program is aimed to help small for-profit businesses located in Hillsborough County that have suffered significant revenue and job loss due to the COVID-19 coronavirus pandemic, with an annual gross revenue between $40,000 and $20 million. Were opened before January 1st of 2020 and are open in some capacity. Find out if your business qualifies for up to $40,000 at hcflgov.net/R3biz or give us a call toll free at 888-393-7509.
Hi, I'm Hillsborough County Commissioner Les Miller. We're going through an unprecedented crisis as we navigate the COVID-19 pandemic. I understand your challenges, and I'm sympathize with the difficulties many of you are facing during this time. Hurricane season started on June 1st. It is important that you plan, prepare, and stay safe. This year, experts are predicting 40% more storm activity than a typical hurricane season. When a storm is identified, it's important to stay tuned to your radio or television and listen to local authorities. Stock your home and vehicle with emergency supplies and make plans in advance to protect people with special needs and pets. If evacuation orders are called, heed the warnings and follow special instructions related to sheltering during COVID-19 pandemic. I encourage you to visit hcflgov.net/stay-safe for information on disaster planning, evacuation zones, shelters, and more. Make sure you and your family plan, prepare, and stay safe.
This is a battle we've never faced in my lifetime. I want to tell you about 416 of the most amazing people. Every day I get to see their skill, professionalism, and dedication. Their commitment to protect and improve the health of everyone in Hillsborough County. The last 2 months, they've been on the front line of a battle with a very dangerous enemy, COVID-19. And they've risen to the challenge in the most amazing, heroic way. Everyone has contributed, sacrificing their personal life, which they put on hold. They're making a difference for everyone they help, and every day I get stopped and told just how amazing they are. I'm proud and blessed to work with them, my second family.
Hillsborough County, along with local and federal health experts, are encouraging residents to wear cloth face masks to cover their nose and mouth when in public to help stop the spread of COVID-19. There are not enough surgical face masks for everyone, and available ones should go to healthcare workers and first responders. It's easy to make your own face mask out of common household items. The CDC and U.S. Surgeon General say you can use an old scarf, bandana, or make one using a t-shirt plus 2 rubber bands. Cut part of the t-shirt into a square, fold it from the bottom to the middle, then from the middle to the top. Repeat those steps one more time, then add a rubber band to each side. Bring each end to the middle, then secure around your face. They should fit snugly but comfortably. Cloth face coverings should not be placed on children younger than 2 years of age or people who have trouble breathing. The CDC emphasizes that while wearing a face mask, you should still practice social distancing, stay 6 feet apart from others, and continue other preventative measures such as frequent hand washing. We encourage you to visit hcflgov.net/stay-safe for up-to-date information.
Is Is your local business or organization looking to give back to the community? Help keep our roads clean by joining the Adopt a Road program administered by Keep Tampa Bay Beautiful. Keeping our roads clean is a great way for team building as well as exposure for your business. Select the road your business wants to adopt and dispatch a team to remove litter and debris. Participants will receive 2 signs showing their organization's name as well as safety equipment and instructions for cleaning roads. You can help keep Tampa Bay beautiful by adopting your own road today. To learn more, visit hcflgov.net/cleanhc.
Hello, I'm WWE superstar Titus O'Neil, and today I'm coming to you as a neighbor. You owe it to yourself and those you love to get tested now. Get the care you need and protect your family. Hillsborough County is offering free coronavirus testing and no health insurance is needed. It costs you nothing to get tested. Visit hcflgov.net/stay safe for more information and have a reservation made today. Share this with a neighbor, and let's come together as a community and keep fighting to get through this. Together, we will come back stronger. God bless.
So let's say that Tim here was returning to his vehicle only to find it missing. He may think it was either stolen or towed. Let's not worry too much, Tim. Hillsborough County wants you to know the rules and regulations should you find yourself stuck in this unfortunate situation. Here are a few rules and tips you should know. Rule number 1, permission to tow. Towing services need permission to tow from private property and must post signs with telephone numbers saying that the trespassing vehicles will be removed. If your vehicle is missing, look for a sign and call the number. Rule number 2, communication. As soon as your vehicle is delivered to the local towing facility, towing services must notify local law enforcement within a 30-minute time frame, and they must return calls from vehicle owners within 1 hour. Helpful tip number 1. Law enforcement can help motorists determine if their vehicle has been towed. If you don't see a posted sign, call the authorities on the non-emergency line. Rule number 3. Retrieving your vehicle during a tow. Most people are unaware that you could still retrieve your vehicle while connected to the tow truck. For a drop fee of no more than half the towing rate, the tow truck operator must release the vehicle to its owner. When it comes to payment, tow truck drivers must accept the following: debit, cash, cashier's check, or money order. Rule number 4, personal property. If the owner is unable to pay the drop fee and their vehicle is in the hands of the towing company, owners still have the right to retrieve personal property from their vehicle. Helpful tip number 2. Having a registration and title in your name will make it easier to recover your vehicle. Tow companies will not hand over the vehicle if you are not the registered owner, unless you have an original notarized affidavit signed by the registered vehicle owner. Remember, Hillsborough County is here to help you. For complete detailed information on towing rules and regulations, please visit us at hcflgov.net/consumer protection or give us a call at 813-635-8316.
Hillsborough County has opened a majority of its conservation parks, trails, and nature preserves to give residents additional options for recreation and exercise. While parks can provide an escape and excitement, county leaders are urging residents to take precautions to protect themselves. To help stop the spread of COVID-19 while in public places, use common sense. Stay home and avoid parks if you're feeling sick. Practice social distancing. Avoid groups or gatherings larger than 10 and stay at least 6 feet from others while exercising. In addition to social distancing, Hillsborough County leaders continue to urge residents to wear cloth face coverings when in community settings. Bring your own water. Though parks are opening, many amenities will remain closed. Prepare for your visit by packing necessary items like hand sanitizer, and it's a good idea to bring your own disinfectant wipes to wipe down any public surfaces before touching or when touching public equipment. But remember, don't flush them after using. Residents who do not abide by the social distancing requirements or listen to
All right, good afternoon and welcome everyone. Let me call to order the September 4, 2020 meeting of the Hillsborough County Land Use Appeals Board. I'm Richard Harrison, the chair of the board, and through the magic of technology, we're going to somehow get our business done today. So welcome to everybody. This is a first for our group using this technology. So let me ask everyone to be patient, be kind. There will be glitches. Things may go awry. We will get through it and we'll get our business done. And we're going to try to run this meeting as closely as possible to the way that we had historically done things live. So let me go ahead and introduce who should be here with us. And then we'll proceed from there. As I said, I'm Richard Harrison, the chair of the board. We have board members, Ricky Bauman and Lawrence Smith. We have two new members joining our board, Jerry Campbell and Peter Schwartz, who will be sworn in shortly. We have Assistant County Attorney Cameron Clark. We should have from Development Services staff, Mr. Tom Hisney, and from Citizens Board Support, Ms. Sonia Rodriguez, and our recording secretary lurking silently in the background, Mr. Joe Harless, welcome. And did I get everybody who's here, at least in our official capacity?
Yes, sir.
All right. So just give me a minute. There we go. There's the group. All right. Very good. So it seems to me the first thing we should do, Ms. Rodriguez or Mr. Clark, is to swear in our two new board members. Would one of you take care of that, please?
That would be the recording secretary, Joe.
I'm here. If the members could stand and raise their right hand. And repeat after me. I. Your names.
Peter Schwartz.
Do solemnly swear.
Do solemnly swear.
That I will support, protect, and defend.
That I will support, defend, and protect.
The Constitution and government of the United States.
The Constitution to the government of the United States.
And of the state of Florida.
And of the state of Florida.
And that I am duly qualified.
And I am duly qualified.
To hold office.
To hold office.
Under the Constitution of the state.
Under the Constitution of the state.
And that I will well and faithfully.
And that I will and faithfully.
Perform the duties.
Perform the duties.
Of the Land Use Appeals Board.
Of the Land Use Appeals Board.
Which I am now about to enter.
Which I am now about to enter.
Thank you.
All right. Well, did we get both members sworn in? I only saw Mr. Schwartz.
Yes.
Okay. All right. So we have welcome to both of you. We have 5 board members now present. And so we have a quorum and a sufficient number of members to take any possible action we need to take today. Ms. Rodriguez, I see on our agenda, is it time to elect board officers again?
Yes.
All right. Mr. Clark, you want to run that show?
Yes, I can do that. Board members, is everyone hearing me?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Okay. Board members, we'll do a selection of chair and vice chair at this time. I'm going to ask for nominations for the role as chair of the Land Use Appeals Board. I will accept nominations until there are no more nominations offered, and then we'll take a vote on the nominations in the order that they were made. Do I have a nomination for chair of the Land Use Appeals Board?
I nominate Richard Harrison.
Mr. Harrison is nominated. Are there any other nominations? Seeing no other nominations, Mr. Harrison is elected chair of the Land Use Appeals Board. Next, I'll ask, are there any nominations for vice chair of the Land Use Appeals Board?
If there are no others, I would volunteer.
Ricky Bauman has volunteered. Are there any, I do need nomination though. Is there any nominations for vice chair?
I'll nominate Ms. Bauman.
Ms. Bauman is nominated. Are there any other nominations for vice chair? Seeing no other nominations, Ricky Bauman is vice chair of the Land Use Appeals Board, and we are concluded.
All right, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Clark. Next on the agenda, before we get to our cases, you have some update for us in terms of our legal obligations and how we do things. Would you go ahead and proceed, Mr. Clark?
Yes, Mr. Chair. The purpose of the Land Use Appeals Board is to hear appeals from land use hearing officer hearings, the cases before you being variance applications. As you know, there are 6 variance criteria that the land use hearing officer is required to rule on in order to grant a variance. The land use hearing officer needs to determine that there is competent substantial evidence in the record to support each of the 6 required variance findings in order for a variance to be approved. The function of the Land Use Appeals Board, being an appellate body, is to review the lower decision of the land use hearing officer to determine if there are any issues with procedural due process, that being notice and the chance to be heard, whether or not there is in fact competent substantial evidence in the record to support whatever the finding of the hearing officer was, and to ensure that the essential requirements of law are satisfied. It's not the function of the appeals board to take the place of the hearing officer, but merely to determine if the evidence is in the record that would allow the hearing officer to make the decision that they made. Whether or not the Land Use Appeals Board agrees with the decision, the key determination is whether the evidence in the record supports the conclusion that was made. Competent substantial evidence is evidence that a reasonable mind could use to reach a specific conclusion. So is there evidence in the record to support the hearing officer's ability to reach the conclusion that each of the 6 variance criteria were satisfied? Are there any questions from board members? Okay, and so the next thing I'll briefly discuss, very briefly this time, on the Sunshine Law. The Land Use Appeals Board is a sunshine body, and therefore members of the Land Use Appeals Board can only discuss Land Use Appeals Board matters in front of, at a publicly noticed meeting such as this one. Publicly noticed meetings are required to have, there must be notice, they must have minutes taken, and there must be access, the public access to be able to at least view the meeting. This one is not a public hearing because it's an appellant process, but it is at least a public meeting. So board members are only allowed to communicate with each other about matters before them as a Land Use Appeals Board in the setting of an advertised, or rather a properly noticed LUAB meeting. Therefore, there can just be no communication between board members outside of this setting on the matters that are before us today. And of course, there can be no communication between members and parties to these cases. And that's all I have, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Mr. Clark. Let me go ahead and review the rules that we operate under for purposes of this hearing with some slight modifications to accommodate the technology in our hybrid meeting here. And then after we go over the procedures, we will administer the oath to any witnesses who are going to talk to us today, and we'll get to our 2 cases on the agenda. This board is an appellate body and shall only consider the land use hearing officer's decision and the record. This hearing shall be limited to the record on appeal as defined in Land Development Code section 10.03.03H and consist only of limited oral argument based upon said record. No additional evidence may be submitted or considered by board members. The order of presentation for today's cases will be as follows: staff's introduction, the petitioner's case, the opposition case, and any rebuttal by the petitioner. Only the following have standing to appeal or to intervene in an appeal which is filed or may be heard at this hearing. Those are the applicant, the administrator, or any person or entity which appeared before the LUHO and presented testimony or other evidence, or presented evidence themselves or by proxy to the LUHO and was adversely affected by the decision of the LUHO. The board reserves the right to limit presentations to 10 minutes per side. And that's what we will do today with some further modifications that I'll talk about in a minute. So there will be 10 minutes per side with 5 minutes for any rebuttal. The board has the authority to uphold the land use hearing officer's decision or to remand the case back to the land use hearing officer. If the board remands a case, and actually, we have two second time around cases today, so let me back up. If the board remands a case to the land use hearing officer, the board shall specify the reason for the remand and specify the issues for the land use hearing officer to address. In today's cases, the board also has the authority to overturn the decision of the land use hearing officer if all the following criteria have been met. The case has been remanded one time by the board to the land use hearing officer. Based upon the record on appeal, if the board finds that one or more of the official findings of fact and the conclusions of law as found in the decision of the land use hearing officer is unsupported by competent and substantial evidence in the record, or if the essential requirements of the law have not been followed, and a supermajority of 5 board members votes to overturn the decision of the land use hearing officer. If the board overturns the decision of the land use hearing officer, the board must make findings of fact and conclusions of law. The board may accept, reject, or modify the land use hearing officer's findings of fact and conclusions of law in making a final decision. In addition, the board may impose reasonable conditions on the permit request if granting the request. The board reserves the right to pose questions to staff, petitioner, and opposition at any time. In order to accommodate this meeting via remote technology, we're going to do this a little bit differently today. Each of the parties will be allowed to speak without interruption by board members. So board members, while the parties are addressing us, I'll ask you to keep your microphones on mute. After each party has completed their presentation, I will call on individual board members one by one to ask any questions that you have. Please wait to be recognized for your questions. After each board member has asked their questions, I'll go for a second round if there are any follow-up questions by board members. But again, we'll do that one at a time so that we are not interrupting the speakers and we're not interrupting each other by interjecting questions. So as the speakers are speaking and questions come to mind, make a note so that you have that until you're called upon, but please do not interrupt. The technology is challenging enough for everybody, so we want to try to do this in an orderly fashion. And the same will apply to the rebuttal case, if any, of the petition. So parties who will address us today, again, you will be allowed your 10 minutes and then 5 minutes for rebuttal to speak to us uninterrupted, and board member questions will follow your presentations. The decision of the board will be rendered at the conclusion of this hearing, and it shall be reduced to writing. The decision of the board is final, but it may be challenged as authorized by state law by any person with standing. Ms. Rodriguez, if you'll go ahead and administer the oath to the witnesses, please.
Those of you giving testimony, please stand and raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. You may be seated.
All right, thank you. And so today we have on the agenda 2 continued matters both of which are back before us for the second go-round. So, Ms. Rodriguez, would you like to call the first case, please?
First case is Appeal 19-15-14. Petition file number variance 180951. The appellant is Robert B. Laver Sr. The property owner is Tom Fairfax. The request is to appeal the decision of the land use hearing officer who approved the variance for the encroachment of the driveway into the required wetland conservation area setback. Approved the variance for the encroachment of the fence into the required wetland conservation area setback, and approved the variance for the 1-foot encroachment of the accessory structure into the required side yard setback. The location is 5007 Bonita Drive. The property size is 3.91 acres more or less. The existing zoning is AS1. The future land use is WVR 24. The surface area is rural. The dates of the land use hearing officer were September 17, 2018, and the remand hearing was July 19, 2019.
Thank you, Ms. Rodriguez. Mr. Hisney, can we hear from the staff on this case, please?
This is the second appeal of the land use hearing officer's decision, the variance application VAR 18-0951. The case was originally heard by the LUHO on September 17, 2018. The applicant requested variances to the following: the required side yard setback for an existing accessory structure, the maximum height permitted for an existing fence, and the required wetland conservation area setback for the fence in a paved area. The LUHO subsequently approved the setback variance for the accessory structure and the wetland setback variance for the fence and the pavement area. However, the LUHO denied the height variance for the fence. The two variances that were approved were appealed by an adverse party of record to the Land Use Appeals Board, and that was under Appeal 19-0279. However, the applicant did not appeal the variance that was denied for the fence height. The LUAB heard the appeal on April 5th, 2019. The board remanded the variance approvals to the LUHO with the direction that the hearing officer further examine the following criteria for each variance. Criteria 1, with respect to the presence of an actual hardship. Criteria 2, with respect as to whether the allowance of the variance will substantially interfere with or injure the rights of others, in particular, with granting of the variance for the encroachment of the fence imposed upon adjoining property owners a corresponding duty to maintain the chain link fence. And criteria 5, with the respect to the presence of a self-imposed hardship. The remand hearing was held in July of 2019. The LUHO subsequently approved all of the requested variances, and the decision was once again appealed to the LUAB by the adverse party of record, which brings us here today.
All right, thank you, Mr. Hisney. Let me go one by one to board members to see if you have any questions for staff before we begin the presentations. Ms. Baumann, any questions for staff?
None, thank you.
Mr. Campbell, any questions for staff?
No questions at this time, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Schwartz, any questions for staff? Mr. Schwartz.
Mr. Schwartz, you are on mute.
No questions, sir.
And Mr. Smith, any questions for staff?
No questions.
All right, then we will move on to the presentations. And in this case, the first presentation should be by Mr. Lavers, who is the appellant here. So Mr. Lavers, you will have 10 minutes of time to speak to us. I encourage both of the parties, again, to please focus your comments on the 6 criteria that we are obligated to consider, and that will help us tremendously. So, Mr. Lavers, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, this is Cameron Clark. Can you have just one moment first?
I'm sorry, what?
I was just going to ask a question. Mr. Lavers is the one who submitted the additional evidence into the record, or attempted to, I believe it was yesterday. It might be worthwhile to start out by stating that that evidence cannot be admitted, as this is an appellate procedure. You had noted that it appears to be just stuff from the record anyway, but if it's new evidence, the board can't consider it. It has not been provided to Mr. Kramer or anyone from the other side, and so I think it should be excluded.
I think the material you're talking about came from Mr. Kramer.
Oh, it did. I apologize. And this stuff, if it's from the record, that's fine, but I guess I don't know why we'd be introducing even duplicate copies at this point. I don't know if Mr. Kramer will want to speak to that, but again, whichever side it is, at this stage, the record's established, and we wouldn't want to be introducing any new materials.
Right. If it's just things that are already in the record, we don't need additional copies, and if it's not already in the record, we're not going to consider it.
Correct.
All right, so let's go then. Sorry for that delay. Mr. Lavers, you have the floor.
Mr. Chair, this is Jake Kramer. I'm just trying to understand what was submitted and by whom. I haven't submitted anything, so I'm trying to understand what was submitted and what the issue is.
Just for this is Sonia Rodriguez. Mr. Laver sent me some information through an email, which I submitted to Cameron Clark. And he advised me that that was not to be sent to the board, and they did not receive that. So they don't have that.
Oh, okay. I apologize for the interruption. Thank you.
Okay, well, I got an email, Ms. Rodriguez, at 1:27 today with a package of material attached.
That was the material that was given to you at our last hearing. I just wanted to make sure that you still had it. That was something that Mr. Kramer stated that was missing from the record.
Okay. So that material has already been verified and it's okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you. Sorry for that confusion. So I think now we are square on that. So let's go back to Mr. Lavers again. And this time you really do have the floor, sir.
We'll do what? Mr. Chair, as long as he understands he cannot make reference to the materials he submitted yesterday.
I'm having difficulty understanding. Obviously everything's muffled. Am I presenting right now, or is there something that I haven't given you that you require?
Mr. Lavers, the information that you submitted to me through email, I was advised by the attorney that that was something that could not be presented to the board. So if there's anything that you want to reference that was not part of the record, you cannot present that if it's not part of the record.
All right, so you can make your presentation now, Mr. Lavers, but what you must do is not talk about anything that's not in the extensive record that we already have. I can't imagine there's anything that's not in the record that we would need to hear anyway, given how thick the record is. But please confine your comments to things that are in the record and go ahead and proceed.
Well, I'm not sure what is and isn't in the record. If what I sent to Ms. Rodriguez is not in the record, I don't understand why, because at each and every one of the variances in this diabolical system that we've suffered through for the last 4 years, I have asked that the last variance that was withdrawn and the hearings that were held, the decisions that were made all be incorporated into the next variance as it was filed. And I was assured that would be done along the way. So that means you have a volume of something in the neighborhood of 2,000 or more pages of information that should be there in the record. Is that correct?
We have the record as it exists. I can't tell you how many pages it is, but it's extensive. So you can refer to anything that's in the record. I don't think it's a good use of your time to debate what's in the record unless that becomes an issue.
Okay. Well, the difficulty we have is that this filing was made because there is a fence, there is a wall, there's a concrete block house and a foundation there too, all that are encroachments into the floodplain, both the old 100-year floodplain, the older FEMA floodplain, and the newer 2008 floodplain. All of these encroachments are smack dab in the middle of all three of those. And the diversion of the surface water due to the fence, the wall, the deck, the foundation, and the house have all been referred to and asked about since the very first application for a variance at 5007 Bonita Drive back in, I believe it was 2017. Mr. Hisney was even asked in the first hearing officer's hearing if indeed the house and the wall had been included, and he said yes it had. That's in the record. That should have been transferred to the next variance as it was applied for when they totally, fully withdrew the first variance. Now, I can't control what y'all have in your record, but I know what's supposed to be in the record. So let me share with you what the problem is that we have today. The very same problem. We have a fence that has been altered several times. That fence still shows in a 5-inch rain in 24-hour period, a 6-inch high tide mark above the 2-foot level on the PVC part of the fence. The last hearing officer asked me, was that high tide mark made horizontally or vertically? Well, that's not for me to know, because under stormwater rules for Hillsborough County, a fence that diverts surface water must be tested in a field study by Public Works and signed off on that it does not divert the surface water flow. It certainly does. It has, it continues to. And 5 inches of rain is not much when we've had 7, 9, and 15 inches of rain in 24 hours in this part of the county through the years, and we can expect more with the changes in climate that we're facing. So something isn't right here. For some reason, someone decided that they would alter the way this would be processed and not use the field study, but no one will answer the question for me. Who decided that? And why did they decide to go with a FEMA no-rise? The only thing that I can find is that the FEMA no-rise is done by an engineer named Irwin, who's paid for by the variance applicant. And that man sent an email to Hillsborough County, and I quote, he says, that's Mr. Irwin. He says, also wasn't aware of a dock being in place. Also, Matt, we addressed the fence in the write-up and EPC was out here as well. If you make a site visit, it becomes more evident that the fence is well up gradient within the cross section and beyond the dense vegetation. Additionally, up gradient of the fence on the applicant's property is a well-maintained and mowed, suggesting an even better roughness than the outgrade. If we are to model a dock, not sure how we would do this. It would be like modeling bridge handrail in HEC-RAS. Something you cannot do is typically neglected. Please give me your feedback on this. And that was in response to Nanette Scott of Hillsborough County, Stormwater, stating that the stormwater management technical manual says no encroachment shall be allowed in regulatory floodway as designated on the FEMA flood maps unless approved by FEMA and accepted by Hillsborough County. Any change in the cross-section of the floodway is considered an encroachment. I consider a dock an encroachment to the floodway, to which Mr. Steve Kolaga said, no rise needs to have the dock and fence included or the county will not approve. I've asked time and again how all this came about and what the resolution was to it, but nobody's been able to answer me. The PE who signed off for, I believe, stormwater was Mr. Schipfer. Mr. Schipfer has talked to me on the phone at length, and he admitted to me that he cannot ascertain that anything that was done in the no-rise is accurate. He doesn't know what was done in the no-rise. It's just his job to sign off on the document so that it then could be passed back to EPC so that EPC could decide whether or not to approve the permit request. Now, we've been shuffled from EPC to stormwater to SwiftMud, who sent us back to stormwater, all of them mentioning FEMA, but nobody wanting to bring FEMA into it and nobody giving me any way to have any means to get FEMA to look at it. But FEMA clearly has to approve, doesn't say provide a no-rise formula. It says approve, and nobody has asked FEMA to approve anything according to FEMA the last time I talked to them. We still have not got an answer from Mr. Schipfer as to who is supposed to make sure that the no-rise was done properly. No one has been able to say, why was a no-rise selected? It is clear the no-rise was selected because if you do a public works field study on surface water flow diversion, it will fail every single time with 5 inches of rain or more, and we've had as much as 15 and can expect it to go higher. If the no-rise, as Mr. Schipfer indicated and Mr. Cabrera indicated, is based upon a 100-year flood level, I can assure you that the fence, the wall, the deck, and the foundation of the house will all be underwater. So no-rise is not going to give you much of an answer to the problem with the fence, the wall, and the deck. It might give you an answer to the house. The house was brought up in the very first variance and has been deliberately ignored by Hillsborough County authorities ever since. This is a travesty. It's damaging the environment. It wiped out a 46-year-old colony, at least 46 years since was there, colony of protected gopher tortoise on the southwest corner of my property. And I'm losing inches off of my property every time we have a rain of 5 inches or more. Sometimes I lose several feet. Trees have slid down the banks into the creek. This is truly a travesty. It's an environmental disruption to Hillsborough County that's shameful for anybody to endorse. All we get is rhetoric from the hearing officers. This board has been the only thing that's protected us. This board represents the people. You are a board of people in the community to help us be protected according to the mission statement of Hillsborough County government, which states clearly that we will protect fairly our diverse population in Hillsborough County. We're not getting protected fairly. We're getting ignored. We're being shuffled. We're being passed over by Hillsborough County. And when I ask Hillsborough County department heads over the last 4 years, what on earth is going on? Why can't we just get all the departments together in one room? And we'll make a decision as to what the problem is and how it can be fixed. And are we wrong entirely? And my comment that I got back was from 3 of them was laughter, and that ain't never going to happen. What is the matter with Hillsborough County? This is wrong and it needs to be stopped.
Mr. Lavers, you might want to stay at the podium. We're going to see if any board members have questions for you, sir. So let me again ask board members individually if you have any questions for Mr. Lavers. We'll begin with Mr. Smith. Any questions?
I've been trying to follow the testimony, and in this particular appeal, there are three different pieces, and I think we have to address each one individually. I could not determine from Mr. Lavers if his comments were focused on any one of the three. Can I get some clarification of that?
Mr. Lavers, go ahead.
Some qualifications for what? Understanding your question, I guess. State it, please.
There are three different variances included in this appeal. The first one regards the variance for the encroachment of the driveway into wetlands. The second one regards the setback area. I'm sorry. The encroachment of the fence in the wetlands. Then there's the encroachment of the accessory structure and the required side yard setbacks.
Those still exist, if that's the question.
Well, that's my question. If you could pinpoint some statement to each of those particular variance aspects.
Yes, sir. The driveway was deliberately moved to make way for the business illegally moved to the property and was ultimately supposed to be put back, but instead, even though it was paved without a permit, it's been allowed to stay. For 30 years that I know of, the driveway went right down the middle of the property. When he got ready to move his business there to make room for a parking lot and an office, he shifted it to the west in a big question mark shape that went around by the fences so that he had room to park his service truck and move his crews in and out off of the property. When the business was forced to move, he did not move the driveway back where it belonged, which would have kept it away from the wetlands and the setbacks that it has interfered with since he moved his business there. As far as the fence does encroach into the wetlands and the wetland setback. His answer is that it used to. I've been there a whole lot longer than he has. I've been there 50 years now. That's not where it was. He moved it to the left and built a driveway and got the neighbor whose driveway he paved for free to say that they were the ones that put in the driveway. But Mr. Loach witnessed the driveway being done on an Easter weekend by Mr. Fairfax's crews. All of this has been a travesty of lies from day one. The fence has been confused with the wall. The fence was built without a permit because fences don't need permits, but he violated the sizes that were allowed for the fence. And he put them in the wetlands and wetland setback, and they needed to be studied for surface water diversion by the Public Works Department. That was never done, and nobody will answer why it wasn't done. And that in itself is a travesty. The wall was built in 2016 as visible on aerials by Mr. Fairfax because the illegal foundation for the concrete block home, which is not on the prints, not on the as-built, not on the plans, is 10 foot high by 300 by 400 feet and is filled with waste from his paving company and hydro soil illegally removed from wetlands C. That was not standing up to the floodwaters, and it was damaging his foundation of earth and other things. So he came in and put in a 300-foot long, 3-section, 6-foot thick concrete diverter wall to prevent that surface water from eroding the foundation under the concrete block house that was built in the middle of 3 floodways. And that water is then diverted back into the Dug Creek, which is a flood control project finished in 1964 by Hillsborough County. That in itself is illegal, but then it crosses onto my property on the east side, which is higher, and wiped out a gopher population. We didn't even know what was going on until I climbed a tree and realized he built that house that he promised to build years before, but we had warned him that it was illegal to raise an elevation in the Dug Creek floodplain.
All right, Mr. Lavers, let me cut you off. Mr. Lavers, let me cut you off there. I think we're getting way past the question. Mr. Smith, any further questions?
No further question.
All right, Board Member Schwartz, any questions?
Yeah, just one. Thank you, Mr. Labor, for being here. Could you go into just a little more detail as to how your property has been affected since these changes have been made?
Yes, sir. The fence was the first indication. We now know that the fence was built blocking the entire flow of water because it had a chain link fence at the bottom 2 feet, which is illegal in a wetlands or wetland setback. Part of that has since been removed, but before it was removed, enough of the water flow was blocked that it forced the water, which normally would have gone directly through the existing site of the concrete block home and its foundation. It can no longer go there, so it turns left and goes across the back of Mr. Loach's property at 5015, and it has now cut a ditch 10 foot wide and 10 foot deep, which automatically transfers the surface water toward Dug Creek, which once again is illegal. The fence then, having been chain link having then been removed, because DEP's rules even say it can't be there. And when it was removed, I went out after a 5-inch in 24-hour rain and took pictures of the fence. And you can clearly see in the record that the high tide mark on the existing fence 2 feet above the ground still has about 6 inches of high tide that was caused by the water flowing past the fence that was built east to west and flowing down the fence that was built north to south. They agreed at one point to take down the east-west section, which is 170 feet long, which had created the 10-foot ditch, but they reneged on that, and now they're apparently suggesting to EPC that they're only willing to remove 30 feet closest to the creek. We have no explanation as to what the logic is there. And when you look at the EPC rulings or EPC permits, you'll notice that the drawings are not certified by any engineer. There's no dating on them. I was able to ascertain that Hillsborough County's had those documents since June. I just received them a week or so ago.
All right, hold on. Hold on, Mr. Lavers. Let me cut you off again. It's going to be much more helpful to us if you would try to focus on the questions that are being asked. I'm not going to let you give a 10-minute speech in response to every question. Okay? So the question was, tell us about the effects on your property, and I haven't heard you say anything about that. So we're going to move on. Mr. Schwartz, any further questions?
No, thank you.
Board Member Campbell, any questions? Board Member Campbell.
The applicant is trying to answer still.
Only to a greater degree.
For Mr. Kramer is the variances that were allowed were for the driveway, the fence, and the side yard setback. If those variances were not granted, would you still have the perceived flooding that you believe on your property?
Um,
In other words, if these three variances had not been granted, would you be satisfied? There would be no additional impact on your property, or would there be additional impact from other things on that property?
There is additional, but this also absolutely affects, and it's never been approved.
Okay, thank you.
Any further questions, Mr. Campbell?
Not at this time.
All right. Vice Chair Bauman, any questions for Mr. Labors?
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right. And I do not have any questions. So, Mr. Labors, thank you. We will come back to you. You will get a chance to have a rebuttal for 5 minutes after we hear from the other side. But for now, we'll ask you to have a seat so we can hear from Mr. Kramer on behalf of Mr. Fairfax.
Diagram we're trying to get on the Elmo here.
There you go.
Can you bring it down? There, perfect. Okay, thank you. Mr. Chairman, I'm ready when you are.
All right, Mr. Kramer, the floor is yours for 10 minutes without interruption, and then we will have board member questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Jake Kramer with Stearns Weaver Miller, 401 East Jackson Street. I'm a land use attorney. I also have expertise and experience in land use planning. I have a master's in urban planning and formerly worked at the state land use planning agency. We're here today on an appeal of 3 straightforward variances. One, a variance for minor wetland setback encroachments of a paved driveway that provides the only possible access to Mr. Fairfax's home and property. 2, a variance for minor wetland setback encroachments of a fence. That's the only way my client can secure his uniquely vulnerable property in an area that is a crime hotspot. And 3, a variance of 1 foot to the western side yard setback for a building whose foundation existed in the same location since the late 1980s, before Mr. Fairfax bought the property. But before we go further, I just want to be clear on the standard. I think Mr. Clark did a great job explaining that. I wanted to emphasize that it's not my client's burden as the variance applicant, that the LUHO has now recommended approval of these variances to prove that there's evidence in the record. This board's rules say that the board should find whether the decision below is, quote, unsupported by evidence, and whether the essential requirements of law have not been followed. I heard a lot from Mr. Labors just now, but unfortunately I didn't hear a single item of complaint that he had that goes to either of those 2 criteria that this board has to consider for each of those variances. So this board, when this board remanded to the LUHO, this board was satisfied in its review of criterias 2, 4, and 6. So this board asked for re-examination of criterias 1, 3, and 5. Now on the hardship criteria, I've put case law on the record. In Florida, the question of an after-the-fact nature of a variance, the case law says that is not relevant to the decision and cannot be considered in a variance analysis. What you look at is the property itself. Whether or not something is built on the property, you have to determine whether the property itself of its very nature determines whether a variance is allowable or not. So I'd like to get to the variance criteria. And actually, I'll give you a little bit of background about the property first. This is Bonita Drive. You can see this is a recent aerial along with this is in page 632 on your record. This is a graduated coloring a topo map laid on top. The property falls about 10 feet from north to south, and it also falls about 10 feet from west to east. What that means is there are wetlands along the eastern boundary of the property, along the southern boundary of the property as well. You can see there's a pond here. Mr. Fairfax's home is at the southern end of the property. This structure was removed several years ago. This is the structure that we're asking for the 1 foot setback variance for. And then you can see the drive for the property. I'll show you a better diagram in a moment. Snakes along the western edge of the property to give access to the home. This diagram, and I apologize on your screens, it may be hard. It's in the record. This is page 629 on the record, and it shows, again, it shows that driveway snaking along the eastern edge of the property. What he has tried to do is locate the property as much on high ground as possible. There's a great deal of wetlands on the property south and to the east. And between the wetlands and the setback, it results in over 50% of the lot being covered by wetlands or wetland setbacks. And so that makes it very difficult to use this property reasonably. Again, here's that structure we're asking for the variance for. And you can see the minor encroachments here and here. The fence encroachments to the wetland setback that we're asking for here, there's a small section here right at the front gate to the property. Here along the eastern boundary. And then on the north side of the dogleg, after consultation with EPC, we withdrew that request below. So that is not, so there are only 3 minor fence requests. This is an aerial from 1987, page 631. You can see on the northern portion of the property, the driveway runs into the property at the same location. Again, here is a structure in the same location. Now, that structure has been rebuilt. However, it is on the exact same foundation that it has always been when Mr. Fairfax purchased this property from the landowner to the west. Then to get your bearings, here is the pond, and again, there are still wetlands along the eastern and southern boundaries of the property. One of the reasons for the need for the fence, Mr. Fairfax and his neighbor to the west both testified they've had numerous instances of potential burglary and theft on their property. This diagram, again, in the record, page 636, there were, over a 7-year period, there were over 120 instances of property-related theft. And as you can see, it virtually surrounds the property. So not only is he in an area that's susceptible to crime, but he's also had personal experience and needs a way to secure his property. That's why we're asking for the fence variance. The neighbor to the west, again, this is in your record, the neighbor to the west testified below that they were in support of the variance. They are the most immediately affected by the side yard setback, and they also presented information in the record in support of that as well. Now, turning to the specific variances, variance 1, this is the driveway variance. If you look at the LUHO's opinion, the LUHO found a hardship addressing criteria number 1 because of the narrow property frontage, because of the existing building and drives at the time the owner bought the property, and the inability to move the driveway, and 3 low areas that limit the location possibilities for the driveway. Again, the topography issue. Criteria 3, when the LUHO addressed that criteria, the LUHO found that agreed that there was no substantial interference with rights. The LUHO found that because of the drive location, because the drive location is internal to the property and not visible to others, and because the drive was placed to purposely avoid low, wet areas as much as possible. Otherwise, the landowner would not be able to access the property and his home. Criteria 5, the LUHO found that this variance did not result from an illegal act. Again, going back to the case law I mentioned, we're focused on the property, not whether this is before the fact or after the fact. And the variance resulted from the location drive, the location of the existing drive at the time of purchase, the location of the existing building, location of the wetlands, and site topography when the property was purchased in 1983. All of these existed prior to purchase again. Moving to variance number 2, this is the fence setback to wetland encroachments. Again, we're not asking for wetland impacts here. We're asking for encroachments into the wetland setback. Criteria 1, the LUHO found the hardship was based on the unique wetland configuration and the unusual shape of the property. I showed those to you earlier. Those are in the record. And this leads to a practical difficulty in fencing for security because otherwise the property owner would not be simply not able to fence his property unless he were allowed to encroach into those setbacks. The LUHO examined criteria number 3 and found that there was no substantial interference because it was only 90 square feet. And the chain link mentioned in the LUAB order was removed during the LUHO process below along the eastern fence line. And so there's no possibility of interference with the adjacent landowner. And I would note that Mr. Lavers is 2 doors down. His property briefly in a very small area touches Mr. Fairfax's property, but he's actually 2 doors down. And then criteria 5, the LUHO did again find hardship that was not a result of his actions for the reasons we've discussed. The variance 3, the side yard setback, again, I would say the only affected property owner to the west sold Mr. Fairfax's property. Everyone knew about this going on. We only found out about it because staff was analyzing our other requests for variances, and they asked us to bring the property up to code. The LUHO again found each criteria and pointed to evidence in the record for each of those. Again, we're only asking for a reduction from 15 to 14 feet, and that building has existed there for many, many years since the 80s. So with that, I would appreciate your approval so that my client can access his property, secure his property, and utilize a very expensive building that has been that is on the foundation of a that's existed since the late 80s. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Kramer, thank you. Stand by for board member questions, and we'll follow the same process. So again, let me start with Board Member Smith. Any questions?
No, sir.
Board Member Schwartz, any questions?
No, sir.
Board Member Campbell, any questions?
Not at this time, Mr. Chairman.
And Vice Chair Bauman, any questions?
Yes, Mr. Chair, I have one question of Mr. Kramer. Mr. Kramer, on the map, could you please show us where Mr. Lavers' property is adjacent to your client's property, please?
Yes, sir. Jake Kramer for the record. Mr. Lavers' property is on the opposite side. There's a feature here called Doug Creek. In your record, it's light blue. It may be difficult to see here. Doug Creek touches Mr. Fairfax's property here. Mr. Lavers' property touches this, what I call a dog leg, just to the east. So the water all flows in this direction. Mr. Fairfax testified on the record below that that flooding existed when he bought the property.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer.
Any further questions, Ms. Bauman?
None. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, I have no questions for Mr. Kramer, so thank you for your presentation. Mr. Lavers, you have 5 minutes of rebuttal time to address anything that you heard Mr. Kramer say, or say anything else you want for the next 5 minutes.
Yes, sir. The driveway was not moved until they moved the business there to make room by bringing it around the west side of the parking area for their trucks and their heavy equipment. The building that he says existed from the start was a 2-horse stall barn, later replaced with a double-wide mobile home, which did not require the driveway to be moved from Bonita Drive to where it now shifts to the west. It went straight down the middle of the property, and I have it in the record time and again. I even drove down there several times during this series of variance requests to notify Mr. Fairfax that his gate was left open. That's something I used to do before he did this. And the driveway was still there. The building that is there now is absolutely not 15 feet high or 18 feet high, according to your own county records and the county measurement. It's at least 23.1 feet tall and therefore should not be where it is. It was the extension of that building over the top of that foundation for the double-wide mobile home. It was an extension of that protruded into the driveway that made it necessary for them to move it to the east from Bonita Drive down past that illegal building that was built strictly for the business. They continue to present a sheriff's department imposition of a hot spot in Hillsborough County, and it's in the record time and again. Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department has said there is no such thing as that hot spot, and that the property theft in that neighborhood is not considered serious. If it were serious, you'd note that the entire southern border of Mr. Fairfax's property has no fence. The entire right southeast side has no fence. If anybody wants to go onto that property and steal anything, it's easy to do. It is not what they present it to be. When I asked the sheriff's department about this hotspot theory and all these property difficulties of theft, they laughed. They said they don't have hotspots. That is not their drawing, and it is not from their records. It is the artifacts of Mr. Kramer's staff. The only time the neighbor to the west ever had a break-in was after the fence was built, ironically enough. Mr. Fairfax has never had a break-in, never recorded a theft according to the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Department ever since he bought the property. Other people in the neighborhood have, but it's no different than any other part of southeast Hillsborough County, and much less than many. The fence is indeed a problem. The paved road is indeed a problem to the setback from Bonita Drive all the way to that illegal storage building, the service building built for his garage for his equipment and trucks. He didn't want to bother moving it, so he made up a story about how important it is for him to have it there for theft. Again, over a third of the property can be accessed on foot or on horseback or on a four-wheeler without crossing a fence line. My property is definitely impeded because the flow of water normally went from Bonita Drive Bridge at Doug Creek southwest directly into where the foundation of that concrete block house, the diverter wall, and the fence now stands, including the deck. The deck is used to maintain the flow of water from getting too high to go over that diverter wall. The diverter wall was built exactly on the line between the wetlands and the wetland setback, according to EPC. The gentleman that studied all that for me was Mr. Vorstadt, but he's been transferred to a different department in EPC.
All right, let's see if we have any board member questions based on the rebuttal. Mr. Smith, any questions?
Well, I'm wondering if Mr. Laver is not talking partly to the appeal coming up after this one. These two cases are so similar, and there's the same testimony seems to be back and forth in it, but I don't know if that requires any further clarification or if that's even possible, but I raised that issue.
No, we have separate cases and separate records. So if you have questions about Mr. Laver's rebuttal, go ahead and ask them. If not, we'll move on.
I say move on.
Okay. Board member Schwartz, any questions?
No questions. Thank you.
Board member Campbell, any questions?
No questions at this time, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Bauman, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
All right, Mr. Lavers, thank you for your rebuttal presentation. This is now the portion of the meeting where the board gets to make a decision. Mr. Clark, make sure I get this right. This is the second time that we've heard this case, so we can uphold the land use hearing officer. We can remand for further consideration, or we can reverse ourselves if that is our decision. Is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Chair. It would take a supermajority of 5 members to overturn the Lujo decision. So that obviously would be the full board that's present at this time. Yes, those are the 3 options before you.
All right, so board members, we would ordinarily we would ask for a motion, and if it gets a second, we would have discussion. So understanding what our 3 options are, is there any board member that wishes to make a motion at this time?
Mr. Chair, I make a motion to uphold the decision of the land use hearing officer.
Vice Chair Bauman makes a motion to uphold the land use hearing officer's decision. Is there a second to that motion?
I second it.
I second that motion.
All right, motion has been made and seconded. Board members, any further discussion before we call that for a vote? And let me just go down the roster one more time. Mr. Smith, any further discussion on the motion?
Well, I'm still somewhat unsure of the Lujo's continued interpretation of the size of this structure that was a trailer, pony shed, and there's documentation that shows aerial photos of it, and then it kind of morphs into a big concrete space with a new dimension and size. And I'm just troubled by the way that was considered factual when there's so much in the evidence in the way of aerial photos that show that this thing morphed. And so much of the Lujo's decision involves the fact that this great big structure is there, therefore it's needed to grant these variances. That troubles me, and for that reason, I would not be able to vote for this.
All right, Board Member Campbell, any discussion on the motion?
Not at this time, sir.
Board Member Schwartz, any discussion on the motion?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Bauman, I'm going to assume that you're in favor of the motion you made. Do you have anything further that you want to add?
No, Mr. Chair, thank you.
All right. I did not hear the appellant ever address any of the land use hearing officer's findings at all, much less say anything to lead me to believe that they are not supported by competent substantial evidence. So I will certainly support the motion. So we have heard from board members. We have a motion made and seconded to approve the decision of land use hearing officer. All in favor? Well, let's do it by roll call because again, we have to adapt to our technology. So I'm going to call the motion for a vote. We'll do it by roll call. Mr. Smith, for or against the motion?
Against.
Board Member Campbell, for or against?
For the motion.
Board Member Schwartz, for or against?
For the motion.
Vice Chair Bauman, for or against?
For the motion.
And my vote is for the motion, so the motion carries by a vote of 4-1. And staff will prepare an order accordingly. That concludes our first case. So, Ms. Rodriguez, let's plow ahead if you would. Would you call the second case, please?
The second case is Appeal 20-0409. Petition file number variance 190074. The appellant is Robert B. Laver Sr. The property owner is Tom Fairfax. And the request is to appeal the decision of the land use hearing officer who approved a fence height variance to accommodate an existing fence. The location is 5007 Bonita Drive. The size of the property is 3.92 acres more or less. Existing zoning AS1. Future land use WVR24. The service area is rural. The date of the land use hearing officers were December 17, 2018. The remand was July 19, 2019, and the continuance of the remand hearing was October 14, 2019.
Thank you. Mr. Hisney, would you provide staff summary, please?
Sure. This is the second appeal of the land use hearing officer's decision and variance application VAR 19-0074. This case was originally heard by the land use hearing officer on December 17, 2018. The applicant requested a variance to the maximum height permitted for an existing fence on property zoned AS1. The LUHO subsequently approved the variance subject to the following conditions. 1, this approval is with respect to the requested fence height only and is not indicative of any regulatory position with respect to placement of the fence in wetlands or wetland setback. Condition 2, the applicant shall at all times maintain the fence in a manner that allows the historical free flow of water in its pre-existing drainage pattern. The LUHO's decision was appealed by an adverse party of record to the Land Use Appeals Board. That appeal number was 19-0528. The LUAB heard the appeal on April 5th, 2019. The LUAB remanded the variance to the July 29, 2019 LUHO meeting for further consideration and clarification of the following matters. 1, since the AS1 zoning provides for a 4-foot fence height in front yards and a 6-foot fence height in side and rear yards, the findings that justify a 4-foot increase in the front yard should be stated separate and apart from the findings that justify the 2-foot side and rear yard increases. Number 2, variance finding 5 should state why the requested fence height does not constitute a self-imposed hardship, particularly in view of record evidence that the fence was constructed in contravention of the maximum AS1 fence heights. Also, since 8 feet would be the maximum allowable fence height only if the variances under consideration are approved, finding 5 should state why the requested 8-foot height does not constitute a self-imposed hardship in view of the property owner's expressed intention to remove 1 foot from the existing fence in order to reduce its height to 8 feet. And number 3, whether the property owner's impending expert evidence reasonably demonstrates that the requested 2 feet of additional fence height is needed to facilitate the flow of water across the property, and that the structures on the property will not adversely affect the water flow thereon. These drainage concerns should be considered relative to each of the 6 variance criteria that the same is relevant to. The land use hearing officer opened the remand hearing on July 29th and took testimony from the applicant and the adverse party of record before continuing the case to the October 14th, 2019 LUHO meeting to allow the applicant time to conduct additional research to address the LUAB's direction on whether the fence height variance is needed to facilitate the flow of water across the property. The LUHO reopened the hearing on October 14th as scheduled. During the course of the hearing, the applicant removed a portion of fence identified as segment C from the variance request. The LUHO subsequently approved the amended variance subject to the following conditions. The first 2 conditions were the same as approved originally, and then a third condition identifying that the segment C of the fence that was identified in the applicant's materials is not included in the approval because it was withdrawn by the applicant at the hearing. This decision was once again appealed to the LUAB by the adverse party of record, which brings us here today.
All right, thank you, sir. So, Mr. Lavers, you are up for 10 minutes of time, uninterrupted. We'll follow the same procedure we did on the first case, so you have the floor, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, we have the same problem. The fence was built without consideration of the requirements of Hillsborough County or of stormwater and surface water diversion. It was built as a wall, not the wall that we refer to back at the foundation of the concrete block house, but it was solid to the ground with merely a slight gap at the bottom. They moved it up when we filed against the variance, and they put chain link at the bottom in violation of DEP and EPC and others, which does not allow or permit any kind of mesh. We still have the problem that we brought at that time, and now it has not changed. The water flow over the adjacent property 5015, which is directly to the east of 5007, that water flow now reaches 6 inches up onto the solid part of the PVC fence, which extends 2 feet above the ground on the property line. Again, the hearing officer asked me, is that watermark horizontal or vertical? On the north-south span, it's probably horizontal. On the east-west span, it is definitely perpendicular, sorry. The water is restricted in its flow by the bottom of the PVC fence, even at the 2-foot level. The reason the water comes up so high is because of the house, the diverter wall, the mountain of foundation illegally placed under the concrete block house, which was illegally removed from wetland C, hydric soil not allowed in foundations, and it is, along with waste from Mr. Fairfax's paving company. All of this has been clearly stated in the record year after year, case after case. We still have the problem with the fence that supposedly is for property protection, only covers 2/3 of the property perimeter. And now they're willing to give up another 30 feet close to the creek. Those people who have had break-ins in that neighborhood, most of them have come from, believe it or not, the creek. That's how people have accessed the properties. So it's a fallacious comment and position to take that they're protecting anything on that property. Mr. Fairfax moved away over a year ago, 3 miles away, and lives in another big house and doesn't come there anymore. He still has it maintained by a mow crew. We presented pictures that the mow crew does not take down the high vegetation growth on his side of the fence where the water flows perpendicular to the east-west fence. That growth in the pictures shows you that the vegetation is thick and heavy in coarse grasses and large clumps covering the entire area and is at least 4 to 6 feet tall now. So the water is trapped on Mr. Loach's property and cannot leave. It has to go back into Doug Creek, which is a violation of the rules and laws of stormwater and surface water flow, and then crosses over onto my property on the other side because it doesn't have any way to get out because there's a mountain of dirt, a concrete block house, a diverter wall, and a deck that was built in the middle of 3 floodways blocking the water flow. I don't understand what's so complicated that the HOs couldn't understand this and walked around the issues. Any of you can see what Roger Stewart saw when he came out there in the 80s and said nobody is to build up the elevation on the west bank of the Doug Creek, which is a Hillsborough County flood control project completed in 1964. I don't know what else I can tell you. For God's sakes, somebody go look at this mess. I've been told time and again that the board members do, that HOs do, that everybody goes and looks. But we have all these things that are not founded. We have all these felonious facts provided by Mr. Kremer and these other folks. And now we have a no-rise that cannot prove the question in any way, and it has not been reviewed by FEMA. The county PE who signed off on it, Mr. Schipfer, admits he doesn't know what's in it and can't certify that any of those figures are accurate. And nobody has yet answered the question of why is it that Mr. Irwin told Hillsborough County he doesn't know how to include the deck and the fence and the wall in the no-rise. Did he? Did he not? Is it a no-rise? Is it not? Is it approved by FEMA or not? And I have an appeal filed with EPC. They have honored that appeal to deal with parts of this, but there are other entities in Hillsborough County that will not work with one another. They keep shuffling it back and forth. The very proof of that is that Mr. Schipfer admits he doesn't have any idea if the facts are true in the no-rise formula. And Mr. Irwin didn't know how to include the fence or the deck. Something's wrong here. Ladies and gentlemen, for the name of God, please give us some relief here. Make them go back and do this right. It calls for a public works field study signed off in writing to show that the surface water is not altered and diverted. It is, and it will continue to be, and my property will continue to erode, and I still don't have gopher turtles to watch. They were killed by Mr. Fairfax.
All right, Mr. Labor, stand by for board member questions. Board member Smith, any questions?
No questions.
Board member Schwartz, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Board member Campbell, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chairman.
Vice Chair Bauman, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair, thank you.
And I have no questions at this time. So, Mr. Lavers, again, you will get 5 minutes of rebuttal after we hear from the other side. Thank you for your presentation. At this time, we will hear from Mr. Kremer On behalf of Mr. Fairfax.
I'm ready when you are.
Mr. Kramer, the floor is yours.
Thank you again. This is Jake Kramer, 401 East Jackson Street, number 2100. I'm a land use attorney. I also have professional planning experience. I have a master's in urban planning as well as professional experience at the State Land Planning Agency. We're here today for one final variance on the same property we just discussed. So I'll try not to repeat myself too much, but you'll have to bear with me since we have our own record on this particular appeal. You know, again, I didn't hear anything from Mr. Fairfax connecting the flooding that he's experiencing and that everyone on the record says has occurred out there. Mr. Fairfax and his neighbor again said on the record that that flooding has occurred since Mr. Fairfax purchased his property. In this case, Mr. Fairfax is asking for a variance to the maximum fence height allowed on his property. Agricultural properties are allowed in this zoning district to have an 8-foot opaque fence around the entire property. However, for some reason that I don't understand necessarily, residential properties are only allowed to have a 4-foot fence in front and an 8-foot fence, a 6-foot fence along other boundaries. So we're asking for the same thing that could be done to agricultural properties in the vicinity of this property. The sole reason we're asking for this variance is that, again, the fence is needed for security, but the fence had to be installed in and near ditches and low areas. So the fence must be raised off the ground. It has to be raised off the ground for safety to allow water, traditional water flows, historic water flows to flow under the fence. In the LDC, you measure fence height from the ground to the top of the fence, whether the fence is placed on the ground or if it has to be raised up to go over a ditch, for example. That's what's driving the need for the variance. And the diagram here, the segment A, that's along the front. We are asking again for a variance from 4 to 8 feet, up to 8 feet. There is chain link along the bottom of that fence. It does not pose a burden on any adjacent property owner because it's along Bonita Drive. The property owner can easily access and maintain both sides. Segment B, along the eastern side of the property, we are asking for, that's again a variance to 8 feet on that side as well. There was formerly chain link under the bottom of that fence in consultation with EPC. We agreed to remove that fence, and that's in the record. Segment C, the top of the dog leg, has that fence has been entirely removed, again in consultation with EPC, and that information is in the record. I'll run through some diagrams again just to frame the issues. You've seen these before. This is an aerial from 1987, just before Mr. Fairfax purchased the property. We have an existing driveway to access the property. We have the existing building that the driveway needed to get around. We have the pond at the south end of the property, wetland features along the east and south, and Doug Creek you can sort of make out along the property line here. Important to note, so this, well, I'll move on to the next diagram. Again, this is the topographical overlay. This is a more recent aerial. Again, this is the rebuilt building in the same location. The fence, again, this is segment A, this is segment B. Mr. Fairfax had to, when he purchased the property, he had to locate his house at the southern end because there wasn't room for it at the north end. The issue with that is that with the drop of 10 feet from north to south and the drop from east to west, 10-foot drop from west to east, his his property is from his home, the building is not visible. So you don't have the same eyes on the street, if you will, experience that you would normally have if you had your barn behind your home to be able to protect it visibly. In the record, Mr. Fairfax again testified that this is the same location as the previous building, that the neighboring property owners sold the property to him in this configuration, and that he now keeps several $100,000 worth of equipment in the building. Again, you've seen this graphic before. This is the diagram showing that there were many property-related crimes surrounding the property over a 7-year period. This is in part what's influencing the need for the fence. What's unique about this property is that Mr. Fairfax, again, in his testimony, he has personally experienced attempted burglaries, as has his neighbor to the west. He testified to that as well. Again, the unique nature of this variance is that the home is at the southern end of the property. More information from the record. This is in part what Mr. Lavers has been discussing. This is in your record at page 564. This is a copy of the no-rise, difficult to see, no-rise certification that was approved by the county. Essentially, this no-rise certification says a few very important things that go directly to the criteria that the questions that this board had on sending this back to the LUHO. What this report says, and by the way, this is the only expert material in the record addressing the question of drainage and water flow. It's entirely unrebutted, and it states that the structures on the property, including the fence, do not cause the rise of floodwaters, and that the vegetation that Mr. Lavers is complaining about actually allows water. It slows the flow of water to make it safer, and that allows the water to have less channelization. It allows the water to get under the fence. That 2-foot gap is needed for safety to allow the floodwaters to equalize on either side of the property, either side of the fence. So turning to your criteria or the questions that you sent back, the first thing that this board asked for is that the LUHO separate out the front fence variance from the side yard fence variance. The LUHO did that. The LUHO addressed each criteria adequately, pointed to evidence in the record for each. You also sent this back again asking about a you asked for more analysis on the self-creation potentially of a variance, and especially in light of the agreement to remove 1 foot from the fence. Essentially what the LUHO said for both sides of both segments A and B is that there's not a self-created hardship because the conditions have existed for a long time on the property. There are conditions related to the nature of the property and not necessarily the after-the-fact nature that are driving these variants. So the LUHO agreed that the after-the-fact nature was not relevant, and that the removal of 1 foot from the fence was actually favorable, and that the fact that the landowner, when he realized he was in non-compliance, dropped the fence down so that it would be at the same level, 8 feet, that many agricultural properties could be at, that effort in good faith could not be held against the property owner in trying to come into compliance as much as possible. So again, the LUHO, as you're looking through the criteria, especially with the front fence, the idea is that and I'm running short on time, so I'm not going to run through each and every criteria as the LUHO has addressed them. I do want to address the point that Mr. Lavers made about the entire property not being fenced. The LUHO found that that was not that was not a sufficient fact to rebut the evidence that there have been crime issues and that a fence on the front portion of the property and the eastern portion that's most visible from the road, that still does serve to protect the property. Essentially, we're talking about no fence on the southern boundary of the property. Maybe someone could crawl through the mud and swim to Mr. Fairfax's property, but it hasn't happened. And so the LUHO found that the fence was essentially put in a location that balances correctly the public interest in making sure historical drainage flows are allowed and continue in the name of safety and property rights. That factor was balanced with the need for security.
Thank you, Mr. Kramer. Stand by for board member questions, please. Board member Smith, any questions?
No questions.
Board member Schwartz, any questions?
Yes, I have a question just to clarify something. On side B, along there, are you saying they're going to put an 8-foot fence up, or I mean a 6-foot fence up, but it's going to be 2 feet above the ground for a total of 8 feet to allow water to go underneath it? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, sir. So it's the same scenario for segments A and B. It is a 6-foot panel opaque fence, a standard PVC fence that you've probably seen at Lowe's or Home Depot, and that fence is raised 2 feet above the bottom of the 2 feet above the ground. So you have 2 feet of gap, and then above that you have 6 feet of fence, and under Hillsborough County's code, that measures to be an 8-foot total height fence.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify that. Thank you.
All right, board member Campbell, any questions?
Yes, one question for Mr. Kramer. So I think what I understood was that the fence previously was at 9 feet. They took 1 foot of it off to bring it down to 8 feet. And that's where it is right now.
Yes, sir. The evidence in the record is that there was one small portion of the fence that was at 9 feet, and that was moved down to 8 feet. So, yes, sir.
Very good. Thank you. No further questions.
Vice Chair Bauman, any questions?
I have no questions of Mr. Kramer. Thank you, Mr. Chair, but I would like to ask staff a question.
I'm sorry, say that again.
I have no questions of Mr. Kramer, but I would like to ask staff a question on the case.
Why don't we hold that until after we hear rebuttal, and then if anybody has questions for staff, we'll go ahead.
That's fine. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Kramer. Mr. Lavers, you have the floor again for 5 minutes of rebuttal, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Once again, we still have the same situation. Even at a campaign stop, Chet Chronister even admitted that there is nothing unusual about our neighborhood. I can't prove that because, as he states, and just like their records department states, they don't get involved in these kind of incidents. But they were very open and candid about the fact that this is not their drawing. It is not accurate. Many of the cases listed on it are not property cases. And if you look at parts of that supposed hot spot, it's well to the south of where this supposed mud water is that people can't swim through to get to Mr. Fairfax's property from the south side. That's absolutely false. And if Mr. Kramer would just go out there and look at it with me, I can prove it to him. I can walk right up to the back of that house. Anybody who wants to know the truth about this property and the situation we're facing can find it in the record. The record goes back 4 years now, variance after variance, pulled and reshaped and redeposited right back in your laps to get the LUHO to say yes to something. They even agreed to the fence height out of the first variance request, which was completely removed from the record. It was withdrawn. You can't approve something based on the fact in a withdrawn application for a variance. The next situation that has to be dealt with is this water flow thing. You can't say that the vegetation is being maintained on their side of the fence and then say it's left so that it will slow the flow of the water to a safe condition. I believe I'm the only person here that's ever been in that water flow, and it will take your feet out from under you, vegetation or not. But when it hits that vegetation, it diverts it to the east because it can't go straight because there's a house and a deck and a diverter wall built in the middle of the floodway. Why? Please tell me why. Is it so hard for folks to picture that? He's showing you pictures of a piece of property, and he's telling you that the water flows a certain way when it absolutely does not. The normal flow plane is from the bridge at Bonita Drive down Doug Creek. When it spills over the bank on Doug Creek, it then goes south-southwest, and right in the middle of that flow is a 10-foot high mountain of illegal fill underneath a concrete block building and a diverter wall put in 10 years later because it wasn't sufficient to have just riprap protect that foundation so that he could divert that flow back across into my property. The fence helps do that because now the fence has eroded a 10-foot deep ditch that goes from east to west on Mr. Loach's property, just on the north side of that fence. Until that is properly filled in, it's not going to stop diverting that water flow in the initial parts of the flooding. You can't keep building fences in a wetland setback, and to force surface water to go onto somebody else's property. I'm believing my 75-year-old eyes when I watched that water flow, and I've watched it for 50 years. You can do a no rise till you're blue in the face. An unproven no rise, which the PE who signed off on it admits he cannot attest any facts in it. And FEMA has never been asked to approve it, which is also a requirement right there in your rules. And nobody has done the public works study because the public works study will prove what I'm telling you is absolutely true. They're diverting surface water back into the creek, which is illegal, across the creek onto my property, which is illegal, destroying my property, which is illegal. I don't understand why this is so hard to picture. This is exactly what's happening. I've gone out there in it. I've taken pictures endlessly. I've given them to you in the record over and over and over. I don't understand why they can come in here and say something that's not true and you buy it. I'm not a very good presenter.
All right, thank you. Hang on, Mr. Lavers. Let's just see if there's any board member questions. Board member Smith, any questions for Mr. Lavers?
No question.
Board member Schwartz, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Board member Campbell, any questions?
Not a question, but I just want to tell Mr. Lavers, I do think you are a good presenter. No questions though at this time.
Vice Chair Bauman, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you, Mr. Lavers, for your rebuttal presentation. Vice Chair Bauman, you said you had a question for staff. Let's take that up now.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What I actually want to know is that 8-foot fence in the front facing the street, is this considered rural, a farmland, or is it considered residential by our zoning?
Well, under the land development code, they generally don't classify a type of fence as to whether it's residential or not, generally speaking. Now, there are some materials, fence materials, that are only allowed in agricultural districts or commercial districts. In this case, a solid wood fence, not the height, but the material is allowed in residential districts, but it's also allowed in agricultural. It's actually allowed in any district, so.
Now, Mr. Hisney, I was
Type of
asking about
fencing
the height. I was asking about the height, not the material, please.
On the height, in agricultural zoning districts, this property is zoned agricultural. An 8-foot.
No, sir, it's not.
I'm sorry?
It is not. In your rules, it says it must be a bona fide agricultural.
Well, excuse
All right,
me.
Mr. Lavers, you're out of order, sir. Please don't do that. Mr. Hisney, go ahead and continue with your response.
Yeah, this property is agriculturally zoned, okay? In agricultural zoning districts, there is an allowance for an 8-foot fence height. However, that allowance is restricted to agriculturally zoned properties that have stables, bona fide agricultural operations as defined by the code, or phosphate mining. Now, this property does not meet those criteria. It doesn't have a stable, it's not bona fide ag operation, it's not fence, it's not phosphate mining. Therefore, under the code, the fences in the agricultural districts regarding height and materials then are the same as in residential districts, which is, and that's why there was a variance required here because of the height. So by code, fences along the front of the property and within the required front yard, which extends from side to side 50 feet deep from the road, is limited to a maximum height of 4 feet, and then on the remaining boundaries, it's limited to a maximum height of 6 feet. That's why a variance was required in this case, because they don't meet the criteria to be allowed an 8-foot high.
All right, Mr. All right, Mr. Hisney, let me ask a question. I think I know the answer, but please correct me if I'm wrong. The variance in this case is only to allow additional height on the fence, correct?
That is correct, sir.
All right, so in the absence of any variance, had the property owner never asked for a variance for the fence height, what height fence could he have built along the front and side?
As stated, along the front of the road, it would be limited to a height of 4 feet. Also, in the first 50 feet back from the road, side to side, it would be 4 feet. So that would mean on each side property line, 50 feet back from the road, it would be 4 foot across, right on the property line. Along the road frontage is 4 feet. Remainder of the property, it would be 6 feet.
All right, thank you, sir. All right, board members, we've heard the presentation. So again, this is the point at which it's incumbent on us to make a decision. So let me ask if any board member has a motion that they would like to make. And again, we have the same 3 options that we did in the first case today: to approve the land use hearing officer, to remand with further instructions, or to reverse it on our own if that is our inclination. So any board member care to put a motion on the floor?
I move to approve the land use hearing officer's recommendation.
All right, board member Campbell has made a motion to approve the LUHO's decision. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Vice Chair Bauman. Any further discussion? Let me go by roll call for further discussion. Board member Smith, anything further to add on the motion?
Oh, nothing to add on the motion, but on the question.
Okay, go ahead.
You know, that I just bring this up because this case has gone on for so many years. Several new board members probably didn't hear all the stuff, but the height of this fence, you just heard it now. It's 4 foot. It's gone up to 8, 9, comes up and down, and there's a lot of discussion about the space underneath the fence. Well, consider a billboard on stilts, and the billboard is only 8 feet, but the stilts are 2 feet, 5 feet, 10 feet. I'm a professional engineer, civil engineer, and I think that the interpretation of when you measure the height would be from the ground to the very top of whatever's there. You just don't give away an airspace underneath and add that to the top. So that's been brought up in the past. I'm just mentioning it for debate now. That's all I have to say.
All right, thank you. Board Member Schwartz, any discussion on the motion?
No, sir, Mr. Chair.
Board Member Campbell, any discussion on the motion?
No, sir.
Vice Chair Bauman, any further discussion on the motion?
Well, what I would say is that I personally wouldn't necessarily like to see this thing visually. And I disregard a lot of the, as I said in the record previously, about the police statistics, but I don't see any expert opinion as to why we should deny the variance. I've seen a lot of talk. I've seen a lot of experience and history, but I have not seen anyone say, this is the reason, these are the facts, no longer opinions.
Right, and let me echo that again. We heard presentation. I didn't hear a single point made about any specific finding by the LUHO or why that finding either lacked evidence to support it or was legally erroneous. I did hear a lot about flooding, which is a little confusing to me because we're only talking about the top of the fence. We're talking about the difference between 4 feet and 6 feet or 4 feet and 8 feet. And I don't know a whole lot about engineering, but I know if there is flooding, it's not being caused by the top of the fence. So I didn't hear anything that suggests that the LUHO decision wasn't adequately supported. So let's go ahead and call the question. We have a motion that has been seconded to approve the decision of the land use hearing officer. We'll go again by roll call vote. Board Member Smith, for or against the motion?
Against.
Board Member Schwartz, for or against?
For.
Board Member Campbell, for or against the motion?
For.
Vice Chair Bauman, for or against the motion?
For.
And my vote is for the motion. Motion carries by a vote of 4-1. And that concludes our consideration of today's cases. Ms. Rodriguez, do we have any new cases for our next meeting?
No one has filed as of yet, but we're still not at the deadline. So the next hearing will be October 2nd, and if anything changes, I will email all of you with the cancellation.
Okay, you'll let us know one way or the other, and if that meeting goes forward, will we be doing it again remotely like this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and I did not see in the package any minutes to approve, is that correct?
That is correct.
All right, thank you everyone who pulled this meeting together. County technology staff, I know you're listening behind the scenes. Great job, thank you very much. Welcome again to our new board members. We may or may not see you in about a month. And with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you, everyone.